Pokemon. This is a sort of table of the different characters in Pokemon. Each of those characters have multiple states of being, multiple antagonisms and friendships. It's a system altogether more complex than the periodic table. And yet we don't say, poor little Johnny, he's behind because I understand Pokemon. Right? The expectation is that no kid will know all of Pokemon, but every kid learns the parts of it that matter to them, and when they get together on a playground, they trade notes, they exchange information with each other, and it's designed to be more complex than can be grasped by a single mind. Now compare that to schools, which often say we can't possibly learn the pantheon of Greek gods, it's too complex a system for our kids. Right? So who's dumbing down our culture right now? Is it popular culture, or is it the way we frame our education around very narrow expectations of what students can perform? The Gates Foundation says more students are dropping out of school now because they're bored than because they're unable to keep up with the information that's being asked of them. That it's not a failure to grasp the information, it's boredom that more than anything else is leading to the students dropping out of school at the present moment. This is a serious problem, and the gap between what we expect in school and this is quite significant. But pop culture, the transmedia nature of pop culture, is one of those things that are helping young people acquire the skills they need to process an ever more complex and variegated society. Go to the next slide. So, the part of the MacArthur group has looked at sort of how do kids acquire these skills. And they say there's three basic modes of acquiring digital skills. First is hanging around. That is, when you're getting together with your friends, what do you go through to connect? And so they were talking about the use of Facebook and MySpace. So for hanging out now means working through digital tool sets to bring people together who may be geographically dispersed. Secondly, messing around is just, I'm going to try this thing. I don't know what it does. I'm going to start hitting buttons and see what happens. It's a mode of experimentation. And geeking out is when, wow, I'm really motivated, I'm interested in something, I'm just going to drill down and see as far as I can go, and I'm going to follow that interest across whatever media channels I need to in order to get the information I want. And these three are very powerful modes. They could individually, collectively, and it's important that these be thought of as modes, not as people. It's not like some people are hang out and other people geek out. It's that most kids are geeks under the skin on some area of their lives. So we have to broaden what you can be geeky about, but there are all kinds of geeks, and they're involved in really drilling down on information as a result of it. And the more access to information they have, the deeper they're going to drill down. Next slide, please. So this stuff, really powerfully, there are experiments going on all over the country to draw this into the schools. This is a group in New York, Global Kids, that I've done some work with, and they use Second Line. They use machinima, digital animation tools that are built into games to get kids engaged with global politics. Its focus is bringing kids together around the world to think about human rights issues, think about issues of poverty, issues of Darfur and genocide, child soldiers in Uganda, sex trade workers in Bangkok. This is me, by the way. They built an avatar for me as Dumbledore to appear in their world. So that's me in my Dumbledore outfit. Okay, next. So what are the challenges? So if we're describing a world where all kinds of learning are taking place through informal means outside of the classroom, what are the problems with that? Well, one I've already alluded to, and that's what I call the participation gap, right? For 20 years we've focused on the digital divide. Can we make sure that every kid in America has got access to a network computer through schools and public libraries, minimally? And we've sort of succeeded. I mean, not every kid, but most kids in America now have access to network computing, thanks to the efforts of people in this room and around the country who really worked hard in local schools. But the problem is that it's still unequal access, right? What you can do with 24/7 broadband mobile access, and what you can do on one computer per classroom, or 10 minutes a day at the public library, with mandatory filters, restrictions on use of most of the platforms of participatory culture. The gap is enormous. It's also, though, a deeper gap in terms of cultural knowledge, of sense of empowerment, engagement, an understanding of how you use this stuff. So you can have access to the technology and not have access to the ability to use it in a meaningful way. In the same way that research has shown that if art museums open their doors free to the public, it's still mostly upper middle class people who come, because the culture of the art museum is something that you're taught to feel comfortable in, and a lot of people feel excluded in. This is what in the 60s they talked about as hidden curriculum, right? The kids who had access at home to encyclopedias and dinner table conversations on politics and trips to the theater did better in school and were perceived to do better in school than those who didn't. And that socialization process is profound. So the participation gap is the gap between those kids who grew up in information-rich households and who come to school and those kids who don't. And there's no, it's really, schools may be the only place that can help close the gap between those two experiences. And if they lock out, if they lock out YouTube and they lock out MySpace and they lock out Wikipedia, they don't allow kids to close the gap in the tools and platforms and experiences they're going to be vital for. So next slide, please. No, we can keep going. All right, second is the transparency problem. So kids are soaking in media, but they don't know how to talk about it, right? They're like the fish who doesn't know it's in a bowl. They're surrounded by media, but they don't necessarily have a language by which to describe the experiences they're having, and so they can't think critically about the institutions that are shaping their own lives. So the vocabulary has to be there. Next slide, please. And the third is an ethics problem. Right? Here we sort of romanticize the image of the high school newspaper, a place where high school journalists acquire their skills, supervised or censored by adults, depending on your political perspective. But they at least had some advice. This is the chart used of LiveJournal. You'll see that it peaks at about the same age as people used to participate in high school journalism, except massively more young people involved in LiveJournal than were involved in high school journalism, and they have absolutely no supervision from adults in their lives. They have enormous publication power, they have no one around them they can turn to for advice. The Harvard Good Play Project talked to teenagers, and most of them said they had no mentor in the online world. There was no one they could turn to who understood the world and the problems they were facing for advice. And that's a fundamental gap. It leads to all kinds of ethical lapses and ethical confusions in our society. Understandably, if you raise kids like feral children of the internet, you know, they're not going to know how to make sense of the choices that they're facing. Right, next slide, please. So we've been working with Howard Gardner at Harvard to develop an ethics casebook that takes on some of the kinds of issues that young people face online. One is the notion of participation. Here we see a kind of virtual world, people that are interfacing with each other. What does it mean to belong to an online community? One that you can leave at any moment, one that you don't know that necessarily people face to face. How do you decide what community participation looks like in that environment? So next slide, please. Second is identity, right? You're a bunch of avatars. When is it okay to mask your identity online? You know, it's interesting, many people tell kids, don't disclose any information about yourself online. If you have to, just make stuff up. And then they wonder why kids confused about truth and lying when their parents have just advised them to mislead people about what's going on. And so different notions of truthfulness, and as they're tied to identity, are ones that kids are really grappling with as they move into the space. Next slide, please. Privacy, right? How much information you disclose. And recognizing that when you pick that picture of yourself in your bra on Facebook, 20 years from now it comes up when someone's looking for you to hire you for a job, that, you know, we used to worry about what was in our kids' permanent record in school. Kids have to learn the internet is their permanent record, right? And whatever's there is permanently available and will be available in the future. So until we reach the point where everyone's got a picture of themselves smoking a joint or in their bra on the Facebook, in which case it probably negates all of that, and we have to rethink our values as a society at some future point down the line, there are risks attached to putting those pictures up there. And the thinking about getting people to think about those risks is an important part of it. Next slide, please. Credibility. How do you decide when information is reliable, right? You know, there was that Kenyan birth certificate for Obama that was circulating on the internet, you know, and it took, and lots of people still believe it to be true. And but at the same time, within 24 hours, people had completely broken it down, discredited it, and built tools where you can make your own Kenyan birth certificate. So this is the kind of world we're living with, constant struggles over truth claims. And how do we sort those out? And you can't rely on traditional gatekeepers to do it.